Hello everyone, today let's solve the problem number 1581. Customer who visited but did not make any transactions, right? So what the question states here, we have two tables, one is visits and one is transactions. You can clearly see here, we have visits table and we have transactions table. So the visits table contain records of customer visits to a mall, while the transactions table logs the transactions linked to these visits. So here you can clearly see visits table. What it does here, visits table contains the records of customers visits to a mall, right? So here you can clearly see visit ID we have inside the column and customer ID we have. Both are of the type integer. You can clearly see here. So we have the visits table that contains records of customers visits to a mall, while the transactions table logs transactions linked to these visits. So here you can clearly see, while the transactions table here, this one, while the transactions table logs transactions that is linked to these visits, right? So this consists of transactions ID, transaction ID, visit ID, as well as the amount. So these three are of the type integer. You can clearly see these three is of the type integer. And one more thing here, our goal is to find the customers who visited the mall but did not make any transactions. So our goal is to find the customers who visited the mall. Here, what is our main goal here? Our goal is to find the mall, find the customers who visited the mall but did not make any transaction. So customer who visited the mall but did not make any transactions, that we need to find, and we need to count the number of such visits for each customer. We need to find the number of such visits for each customer. So that's what we need to find, right? So that is what we need to find here. So I hope this is clear, right? So here in this case, what we'll do, I hope the question is completely clear. What we need to find here, we need to find the customer who visited the mall but did not make any transaction, and count the number of such visits for each customer. We need to count the number of such visits, right? So that is what we need to find here. Let's come to the example one. Here visit ID we have from the visits table. So 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 we have 23 9. This is the customer ID, right? 23 9 30 54 96 54 54 we have. So here in this case we have the transactions table, we have the transactions ID, this one visit ID and the amount. Here in this case we have 2 3 9 12 13. This is the transaction ID. This comes from the transactions table. Here visit ID we have 55512 and amount we have 310 300 200 910 and 970. This is fine. So final the output here is customer ID and count no transactions here. So this is the customer who visited but didn't make any transaction here based on the customer ID and customer no transactions here, right? So here we can clearly see here this one 54 and 30 and 96. This one customer ID 54, 30 and 96. These three 6 5 and 4 or 6 4 and 5 we have here, right? Just give me a second here. 54 30 and 96. This one 54 30 and 96. 5 4 and 6. Visit ID 5 4 and 6, right? So here, so count number of transactions here. Number of transaction here is this one 2 1 and 1, right? So we got 2 1 and 1, right? So I hope this is clear. So here they have clearly explained customer with ID 23 visited the mall once and customer ID equals 23. This one here visited the mall once and made transaction during the visit with ID equals 12. With ID equals 12. You can clearly see. Just give me a second here. This one with ID equals 12, right? Transaction ID we have already for the 23. Customer with ID 9 visited the mall once and made one transaction during the visit with ID 13. So here customer with ID 9 here. This one. So yeah, you can clearly see here customer with this one 9. Customer with the ID 9 visited the mall once and made one transaction, that is uh, during the visit with ID equals 13. You can clearly see here in this case this one. So we have this one transaction ID for 1 and 2. Let's go with the 30. So 23 and 9 we have. So let's go with the 30 here. Accordingly with the question we should get for 4, 5 and 6. The customer has visited the mall but no transactions are made. Right here you can clearly see. In this case customers with ID 30 visited the mall once and did not make any transactions. You can clearly see here, they didn't make any transaction here, right? Same goes with this one 5 and 6 as well here. I mean this one 54 and 96 as well. So they have given same thing here. Customer with ID 54 visited the mall 3 times. During 2 visits they did not make any transaction, and during 1 visit they made 3 transactions here. During 2 visits they did not make any transactions. Only during 1 visit they made the transaction. Same goes with 96 as well. Visited the mall once and did not make any transactions here, right? So here in this case others made the transaction here. This one 30, 54 and 96 we checked, and 54 this one 54 and 54 they made the transaction here. So what we have to consider here, accordingly they have explained it very well here. In this case 54 customer with ID 54 visited the mall 3 times, but 2 times they did not make any transaction, right? So here in this case we have to display this one as 2, return here with the customer ID 54 who did not make transaction twice, so we'll be giving 2 here. Count no transaction here. This one you can clearly see this one, right? So 30 once they have visited the mall once but did not make any transaction. So 1 same goes with the 96. They have visited the mall once but they did not make any transaction here. 1, 2, 1 and 1, right? I hope this is completely clear. So let's go with the initially let's discuss the approach, then let's write the query, right? So now let's discuss the approach first. So here let's discuss the approach step by step. First step here is we have to identify the we have to identify visits without transaction. So we have to identify visits without transaction. That's what they have asked in the question as well, right? So here first what we will do, within identifying the visits without transaction, we will be making use of the left join. So this is very important. Just keep this in mind. We'll be making use of the left join between visits and transaction. We have the visits table and transactions table, right? So we will be making use of the left join. These are 2 different tables. So we'll be making use of the left join between visits and transactions on visit ID. So on visit ID, this is very important, right? So this is very important. So here if there is no matching visit ID, if there is no matching visit ID in the transactions, if there is no matching visit ID, it means the visit had no transactions. In this case transaction ID is null. We can write in this way. So here if there is no matching visit ID in transactions table, then it means visit had no transactions. We have discussed this one during the question explanation of the question. While explaining the question we have went through the example 1, so that's what I am explaining now. If you have heard that one clearly, that's what we will be doing this one. So here we are discussing the approach right here. In this case what happens, transaction second point, this one I am speaking of, transaction ID is null in this case, right? Because if there is no matching visit ID in transaction, it means that the visit had no transactions. So this is fine. So let's come to the second point. I hope the first point is clear, super clear, right? So we have discussed this one during the explanation of question as well. Just keep in mind we'll be making use of the left join between visit and transactions on visit ID. So if there is no matching visit ID in transactions, it means visit had no transaction. In this case transaction ID is null. So that's what we'll be doing here. So here in the second point, let's come to the second point here. We have to count the no transaction visits for each customer. So here this is very important. We have to count the no transaction visits for each customer. Means for each customer, how many times they visited and how many times they didn't make any transaction. That's what we need to consider, right? So first step here is we will filter only those visits where transaction ID is null. This is very important. This is what we need to find. This is very important. We will filter only those visits where transaction ID is null. Then we will be making use of group by clause. Means we will group by customer ID. So we will be grouping, we'll be making use of group by clause to group by the customer ID and count the occurrences. This is very important. So I hope this is clear as well. Let's come to the third point. We will return the result. So finally we have to return the result itself, right? So let's see this one. We have to return the result. Let's select the customer ID here in this case. Let's select the customer ID and the count of such visits. We will select the customer ID and the count of such visits here in this case. We will select the customer ID and the count of such visits. Means who has not made any transaction, who have visited the mall but had not made any transaction. We will select the customer ID and count of such visits. The result can be returned in any order. So they have not mentioned the result has to be, we have to return a result on ascending or the descending order. We can return the result on any order. So we don't have to make use of this one, order by clause, right? So in this case, so this is the approach that we will be going with. I hope the question, the approach is completely clear. So first we will identify visits without transaction. The second part is we will count the number of transactions visits for each customer, and the third one here is we will return the result, right? So now as we know the approach, as we are familiar with the approach now, let's start writing the query. So now let's start writing the query. The first step here is we have to identify the visits with no transactions using left join. This was the first point during the approach. Let's do the same thing here. So we will select the customer ID for filtering visits with no transactions here. So let me come here. Let me make use of the select keyword dot customer ID. This is fine. So the next step here, from visits, right? So visits table. So I'll just consider V here. This is fine. So the next step, we'll be making use of the left join to include all the visits and to match the transactions. We have discussed this one during the first step. This was the first step during the while we were discussing the approach, right? So this is, we'll be going with left join transactions T. This is fine. So the next step here is we will join the condition. We will join condition based on visit ID on. So I'll just make use of on here. V dot visit ID, right? So I'll just keep your visit underscore ID. That's what we have here. Visit underscore ID. Yeah, this one, visit underscore ID, and this one has to be equal to T dot visit ID. We will join both condition based on visit ID, right? So this one we have discussed already. If you remember, just give me a second here. Here. So yeah. So here in this case, did I forget anything here? So this is fine. So if there is no matching visit ID in transaction, it means visit had no transactions, right? So here what we are doing, we are not doing this one. We are joining the condition based on visit ID, means this has to be T dot visit ID. Sorry, I got confused here. This is fine. So the next step here is we will filter out visits that have no transactions. Here on this case, where T dot transaction underscore ID is null. This is fine. So we are just filtering out the visits that have no transactions here, right? So let me do one thing here. Let me write here this one as with. Let me make use of with here. No transaction visits, I'll just make use of as, right? In this case, let me make use of parenthesis. So let me close the parenthesis here, right? This is fine. So the next step, this was step 1. So let's move on with the second step. In the first step, we were identifying visits with no transaction using the left join. Let's come to the second step. During the approach, what we did or what we have to do now, so we have to count the number of such visits per each customer. So we have to count the number of such visits per customer, right? So this one, we will go with select customer underscore id, comma, this one will, let's make use of the count. So we have to count the number of such visits per customer, and we have the count in SQL. Let's make use of count. We have to count all the this one per each customer, means for all customers, right? In this case, that is why that is the reason I'll be going with the star, as we have count no trans, this one, right? So let me copy the same thing and let me paste it over here, count no trans. So we are counting the visits without transactions per each customer here, right? The line number 13. So let's go with the line number 14. So using the CTE that holds customer with no transaction visits. So how can I write that one? Let's make use of from here, no transaction visits, right? So here let me copy the same thing, man. I don't want to type this one again. So let me paste it over here. No transaction visit. So we are counting visits without transactions per customer using the CTE that holds customer with no transaction visits. So that's what we are doing in the line number 14. So let's come to the final step here, or the final line here. So this one, we have to group by customer ID to get the count for each customer. This one we have to group by customer ID, right? Here in the output they have clearly mentioned here. So we are grouping by customer ID to get the count for each customer. So let's go with group by here. This one, group by here, customer ID. So this one, let me leave the space here. This one based on the customer ID. So this one, let me paste it over here. So let me quickly hit the run button. So this is it for the query. So you can clearly see here the sample test case is getting passed. So let me hit the submit button. Let's see whether this works for all the test cases or not. So here you can clearly see all the test cases are getting passed. Means the query works absolutely correct on this case, right? So I hope whatever the query that we have written is completely clear, right? For now, this is it. Thanks for watching, guys.